roots of Secret Glory run deep indeed. I mean, maybe it started of watching too many Dario Argento movies when I was young. Might have come from Martyrs Superiorum or one of the Three Mothers. Certainly I had a strange experience at Montserrat in 1990 when I first came across the Black Madonna, and then started to develop a yen to find out more about it. I was essentially a horror movie fan at the beginning, and I thought all the stuff just sprang out of Dario's mind or out of the filmmakers. I had no real clue about the European esoteric tradition. I like to think of Secret Glory as the European esoteric tradition the hard way, or the difficult way, because New Agers always couch these things in terms of such peace and light, whereas Secret Glory tends to follow a rather dark path. Essentially, it really began for us when I got sent to the Languedoc by Channel 4 television to try and piece together the backstory behind Raiders of the Lost Ark. Certainly, Lawrence Kasdan admits in some of his interviews that he was influenced by Otto Rahn and by reading Otto Rahn's book, Crusade Against the Grail, which was sort of the Da Vinci Code of its day. It was a bestseller in the 1930s, and one of the reasons why Otto did so well in the SS. Otto, of course, is the neglected Grail historian, the unfortunate German etymologist who went looking for the sacred cup back in the 1930s and later became very, very sorry that he'd ever done that. I mean, as far as I can tell, he froze himself to death in 1939. And I think anyone who does that, who eventually reaches the point where one's just so miserable and so upset by what one's done that one can sit down and just freeze, let the snow cover one, has to, made a few little mistakes. Most of the documentaries I shot were never really meant for the public. They weren't really intended initially to be shown in their own right. They usually started out as the rough working out for screenplays, for feature films, for dramas I'd ever made. I initially imagined that Otto's life would make a tremendous feature film, something between Raiders of the Lost Ark and The English Patient. I mean, The English Patient's based on a genuine archaeological discovery and some real characters from back then, and became like a pretty good hit movie for Anthony Minghella. And I thought at the time maybe Otto Rahn would lend himself to something similar. I diligently researched it. I thought, fantastic, a holy grail, a secret treasure. It's not only that, a secret treasure that's related to the secrets of subatomic structure, to the Nazi nuclear program. Occupied France. It was full of juicy elements that should have made a great pulp B-movie. But the further I got into it, the more I started to realize that there were elements of truth in the whole mess. And as we got sucked in closer and closer, certain things like, well, where does the Grail come from and what force is that it serves, started to become real issues. And obviously the big issue here is the Holocaust and World War II. I mean, a lot of people think that the Holocaust is kind of definitive proof that there is no God, that there can be no just or benign supernatural being in charge of our lives, because how could God have let that happen? On the other hand, there's a nasty implication that maybe not only did something let that happen, that maybe something wanted that to happen. The events seem to almost be guided or pushed along by forces I can barely comprehend. I mean, almost everyone involved in the gestation of the Holocaust seemed to think that they were either being guided by voices or that they were the reincarnations of other people. The whole of the events in World War II seemed to run a horrible parallel to the events of the Albigensian Crusade, which had happened in the 12th century. And I think part of my impetus on Secret Glory was a nasty sense of we've got to unpick this mess before it happens again. If these events keep recurring down through the ages, I certainly don't want to see it recur again in my lifetime. And I would not like to be in that period. If I was alive at the time of the Holocaust or World War II, I'd certainly have been killed. I would not have made it through all that. And I certainly hope that I never end up in Otto's circumstances. Secret Glory was a particular challenge as a filmmaker, and it involved events that had taken place a very long time ago. I mean, the Albigensian Crusade itself was almost 1,000 years ago, and World War II now is, more than 70 years ago. So it's essentially a dead event, something there's no real footage of, only still photographs and talking heads. So to try and animate that in some way, to bring it to life, was a real challenge, so it didn't just die on paper. We've tried very, very hard to sort of breathe life into it. I think it's probably been influenced by Hacksan, by the Benjamin Christensen movie. We certainly tried to create a sense of documentary footage from the Albigensian Crusade. A lot of people accept the footage of the massacres and stuff in Secret Glory as if it really is newsreel footage. We included it a bit like it might be Holocaust material, but of course it's largely dramatically recreated. Stuff which is faked largely with the help of sort of the French equivalent of medieval Renaissance fairs. We largely did this project also so that we could shoot something that wasn't quite as deadly as the other subjects. I wanted Imo, the cameraman, to be able to shoot one film where he wouldn't get hurt. He'd been blasted on Voice of the Moon, and he lost his hearing on White Darkness after getting sort of infected by E. coli bacteria while we were swimming. So he did want to shoot something where he wouldn't be harmed for a change. At the beginning on Secret Glory, it didn't seem like it felt like a myth. We thought that there was no reality to it. But what we did is, as we got further into it, we started, basically every time we heard a name or we got a small detail, we would try and cold call the people involved. We looked through telephone directories, like finding Paul the Dam. We just looked for the surname. We phoned every single name we could find in the telephone book for Geneva or Berlin, and just went at it until we got through to them. Usually we got there pretty fast. I mean, we got all the way through to Himmler's daughter on the telephone eventually. If I'd had further funding, we could have gone a lot further. I was very confused as to how it was that people like the Wiesenthal Center, for instance, had such a hard time tracking some of these people down, because mostly they were hidden in plain sight. I mean, usually most of the people we were after were just one phone call away. And all of it much closer to the surface, and unfortunately much more extant than one would have liked it to have been.